You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Adverse drug reactions, or ADRs, are a serious issue in healthcare today. The pharmacist is the last line of defense to help prevent ADRs. A rising role of the pharmacist is the specialist who focuses on our children. Pediatric pharmacy ensures safe and effective drug use and optimal medication therapy outcomes in children up to 18 years of age. Currently, there are more than 1,450 board-certified pediatric pharmacy specialists, known as BPS. If you're interested in this expanding field of pharmacy, this podcast is for you. All right, everyone, let's give it up for our host.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to the Pediatric Pharmacist Review. I'm one of your hosts, Justin Cole, and I'm excited to be co-hosting with Jenna Quinn again. Jenna, how you been?
Great, thank you. And thank you guys for joining us and listening. As always, I'm very excited about this episode.
Yeah, I am too. Today we've got Sharmeen Roy with us. She is the Chief Strategy and Science Officer for DoseMe. So we're going to talk a bit about their product, DoseMeRx, and how this can be used to transform the health of pediatric patients and so many others as well. So Sharmeen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Justin. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a pediatric pharmacist at heart, no matter what I do in my current role. So I love speaking to other pediatric clinicians.
Yeah, we're excited. So with that, why don't you tell us a bit more about your background and how you ended up founding and being a part of the team at DoseMe?
That's a really long story.
We're ready to hear it.
We got time. I've been practicing for way too long to mention, I guess I should say. But, I've been, like I said, I was trained as a clinical pharmacist in pediatrics, specialized in pediatrics. That was kind of my area of expertise and where I practiced for many years, specifically in pediatric critical care. So PICU, cardiac ICU. I see Jenna shaking because I think we share that in common. So I practiced that for quite some time. And then purely for weather reasons, my husband and I decided to relocate to Miami, Florida, which is where I reside now. Things had to change. I had to, I left. I think I had done enough in my position at University of Chicago where I was practicing, building the pharmacy clinical program, pediatric pharmacy program, really growing that team. We also developed a pediatric PGy2 residency there. And so, did quite a bit and established a lot of, policies and procedures and all the things that you need to do that are very special to pediatrics. But when I relocated, I couldn't really let go of pediatrics, right? I still wanted to be involved with it. So I was doing two things. I joined a startup at that time, Pipeline RX, which was a telepharmacy company. So providing clinical pharmacy services to rural hospitals, which is how it initially started. But then we expanded to quite a bit of other areas like, clinical support, helping teams transition from paper to, electronic health record. Shawnette, you probably have never practiced in an environment where there's paper, but believe it or not, that's how we did everything before. Helping in various aspects and just kind of growing. I was, I think, part of 2-3 pharmacists at the time. That company obviously grew and the team grew to, I think there's over like 200 pharmacists now. So quite a bit. But I kept kind of PRN helping at the Children's Hospital here in Miami. So at the time it was called Miami Children's Hospital, and now it's Nicholas Children's Hospital. Helped kind of with the clinical staff. Again, even there, we were going from one EHR to another. So got to get involved with that, how cutovers go for that stuff. And then helped to develop the research operations there, essentially, pharmacy support for research trials. That was something that they wanted to really expand on and grow. So did that for a while. And then COVID happened and things changed. I made a leap to staying with research, but in adults and in oncology, which was quite
Wow.
different.
Yes.
But I knew how to, I knew the research part, right? The research operations. So I had to learn the oncology. So it was funny when the pharmacist who trained me, I had to tell her that pretend like I'm a new pharmacist and train me as a new pharmacist because while I know oncology, I just obviously need to really kind of get a better grasp on what was happening currently. So
Yeah.
I did that during COVID. It was quite challenging. It was Miami Cancer Institute. It was oncology center. So you can imagine the precautions we had to take there and challenges we dealt with there. So I was there for some time, and then after that, it's going to be 3 years. Hard to believe, but I joined DoseMe at the time and as a clinical, sort of overseeing our clinical solutions and service support. And we've transitioned from being part of a large company to, a kind of independently owned software company. And so, we transitioned to different roles, and now I currently serve as the Chief Strategy and Science Officer, where I oversee our CX, which is customer support, implementation, onboarding, and the science team. So everything behind the platform and the product. So I told you it was a long story, and you can cut out whatever you need to.
Oh no, we love it. We love it. My husband calls me Oprah because I love to know like everyone's backstories, and deep life experience. So no, this is perfect. This is right up my alley.
So Shawnette, the lesson is don't worry about taking the traditional path. You just never know what opportunities will come. Just because you just never know. You don't want to kind of, narrow your focus when you're seeing what's out there. So that's what I always tell the students.
It's so true. And Shawnette is one of our students here from LIU. We have had the pleasure at Perfecting Peds to have about 5 or 6 students on rotation so it's like 5 or 6 students for 5 or 6 weeks. And it's been really cool. And Sharmeen, to that point, I always stress similarly, you never know your path. It might not only be pharmacy. Keep your eyes open. I always do tell them too, like I was the most average student, like borderline terrible. And so I feel like they need to hear that too, because like pharmacy school is so cutthroat and you feel like, okay, if I'm an average student, does that mean that, my career is going to be average? And it doesn't equate. And so, it took me a while to kind of build up my confidence after pharmacy school because I was so average. So again, but you have no idea where life's going to take you, Shawnette. So keep your eyes open. But I would love to know a little bit more about your platform. And Sharmeen and I had like an introductory call like 2 years ago. And so this is exciting to catch up to see what growth has happened at DoseMe, which I'm assuming is a ton. But can you hone in on a little bit about what, or the most important thing to us, of course, the pediatric care and how DoseMe is useful at improving the health outcomes of the pediatric population?
Sure. Yeah. And I think all of us can agree there's just never enough, pediatric data. There's not enough research that's being done, even when, drugs get approved, right? Pediatric now, I think because of all the push from the FDA, they do studies to, kind of determine dosing. But I remember being in the PICU, taking care of very, very sick kids, and, you're using drugs that are only approved in adults, but you have to kind of figure out the dosing or find some obscure case report from some hospital that used that drug, and you have to kind of say, okay, well, it worked for them, let's try this dose, or let's just, I don't know, use all the PK parameters and figure out a dose and hope that you're right. So I think that's been a challenge for pediatric clinicians, for even for adults, right? So in certain, depending on the drug, if it's a narrow therapeutic window drug, you have to kind of figure out what the appropriate dose is. And everybody is metabolizing it differently. You all know from kind of the work that you do that there's so much variability in pediatrics and what they respond to and how they respond to it. So, one of the nice things that the DoseMeRx does for pediatric patients is like it's really adapting to the patient, right? So I know we can delve more deeply into how the models work and how it adapts, but really it's, incorporating patient data into dosing and taking in whether it's the, antibiotic microbial level that's being monitored or the patient's renal function, and incorporating that and really adapting to the patient. And you can sort of, with confidence, move forward with dosing, knowing that, okay, it's predicting this outcome. It's predicting, this exposure level to the patient. So you're using more information. So the math we all know the math, right? It exists. You can do it. It's hard, takes time. If you're in the PICU, you have 30 beds that you're taking care of, not always able to do that quickly. So it's really just making that kind of clinical workflow easier for clinicians so they can do the, most appropriate dosing and adjusting of dosing based on the patient's response. So that's really kind of how DoseMeRx helps the clinician with the outcomes, right? So outcomes are very tricky because it's not one thing that leads to an outcome. It's multi-pronged. And so it's helping that clinician make the best judgment and decision based on all the factors they're looking at and what the platform is providing as a kind of a guidance to dosing.
Yeah, Sharmeen, as pediatric pharmacists, we all know how important therapeutic drug monitoring is to tailoring in those doses for each of our kids. So DoseMeRx seems like a fantastic platform to help with that. So let's go ahead and get into the weeds a little bit more. So can you explain to us how DoseMeRx actually works? How do pharmacists interact with it? And maybe you could even walk us through an example drug that can be used in pediatric patients and how DoseMeRx can tailor therapeutic drug monitoring.
Yeah, the funny thing is that it takes less convincing for pediatric clinicians to use it than adult clinicians. So that's good because we know that everything needs to be tailored, right? We're taking care of like newborns to adolescents and almost adults. So we know the variability and the changes we have to kind of incorporate into the dosing. And so that's an easier sell almost, I don't have to convince them as much. Precision dosing is something I always tell people it's now a fancy word, but pharmacists that have been practicing in peds have been doing precision dosing. That's what they do. And so the models we have in our platform, so, majority of therapeutic drug monitoring happens like in antimicrobials, right? So I'll use vancomycin, aminoglycosides. For peds, it's a lot more aminoglycosides. So those are some of the medications that get commonly utilized. And the way the platform works is it's a Bayesian modeling software. So it takes published, peer-reviewed, validated models. We implement it in our software, and it takes those PK/PD models and estimates the outcome based on the patient data. So think of it as the original sort of starting point is the baseline model. Then you have the patient's information that's incorporated into the model calculations. And so it over time individualizes the dosing. So once you get, let's use vancomycin as an example, the guidelines had changed. It's going to be now 5 years, believe it or not, but it had changed to AUC guided dosing. So that is not as easy to do than just, looking at peaks and troughs and adjusting and doing calculations that way. So, taking vancomycin, you can get the level from the patient and incorporates renal function, patient's concentration, and then adjust the modeling prediction based on that and the algorithms that are incorporated.
That's really cool. And that dates me because I remember I was just leaving the ICU as we were starting to use the AUC dosing, and then added confusion to other providers outside of pharmacists that it's a different equation to estimate the GFR for pediatric patients. So that's obviously, and you when you mentioned the bedside Schwartz, people are like, what is that? So I think That's awesome that you're having pediatricians buy into your product. Does DoseMeRx integrate into any current EHRs?
Yeah, so we always have the goal to make it available to everybody, right? So there will be hospitals that just want the web application where, in my opinion, it's always more time consuming because you're manually inputting information. There's higher
Yep.
risk for, input error or data entry error. But it's EHR agnostic, so it integrates with any EHR that can have that, standard Fire API application. I know I'm not a dev person, but that's like the extent of my knowledge of integration. But yeah, so Cerner, Epic, some of the surveillance softwares actually, like Vigilance and Sentry 7. So, whatever is already incorporated into the pharmacist workflow, it will integrate if that's the route that any system or hospital wants to go through. The nice thing with that is that you don't have to input anything. So if it's integrated with your EHR, you pull up the patient's chart, you launch DoseMe, and it will provide the most current information about the patient, whether it's the doses that are given, lab values, serum creatinine values, patient demographic, all that automatically populates. So it just makes everything more seamless and the workflow a little bit easier.
Sharmeen, does DoseMeRx also help to streamline the documentation process for the person that's completing the pharmacokinetic calculations? Like, does it give you all of the outputs, but also put those in a way that could easily be translated to documentation?
Yeah, so it does generate a report that can, so if you're integrated, that's actually the really nice thing, that you don't have to kind of copy, paste, and transfer into a template. If you are integrated into the EHRs, you can just hit, like at the end of the calculation, you can hit generate report, and it will send a progress note back to the EHR, which just cuts down so much time. And also, again, making sure you're not cutting and pasting and having to format. Like, that's just tasks that we don't need to waste time on, right? So that's the really nice thing about it.
Jenna, and for you, Sharmeen, I'm sure we can think back to times when we were in the hospital where we might have spent as much time on our note as we did on the calculations, right? I mean, It just is one of those tedious tasks that takes a clinician's time. And so I love that DoseMeRx has decreased some of that cognitive demand and task-related work for the pharmacist. It lets us do things that we really need to focus on. So yeah. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's essentially it, right? Like bringing it to the bedside, that, just making it easier. So when you're rounding with your team and you get a level that comes back while you're rounding, you can quickly change the dose and adjust it and do what you need to right there at the bedside, and it quickly calculates it. You don't have to make a note. I mean, I remember those days. Make a note, go back, do all your calculations, manually, and then come back and put the note in or change the dose or get a hold of the resident that needs to change it. So it just, the less we need to do of those kinds of tasks, the better it is.
Yeah. I mean, and we live at a fun age where, we can use AI to our advantage, not to replace us, but just help expedite everything that we do. And like you're saying, like we're working with at Perfecting Peds, like how do we use technology to cut down our note-taking time? Because it's like one of the most painful tasks. But it's necessary because, like, if you don't have good communication, if they flip between, we're communicating out to other providers, obviously that could be fatal. So that's really cool that you guys integrate into all the EHRs. And now that we're building our own technology here called RX Junior, I can actually keep up with the lingo that you're saying. Again, very surface level.
Yeah, that's the fun part. I think that is like the superpower of pharmacists, that there's so many things that we can do, right? So it's taking care of patients, of course, reviewing medications, those are our expertise, but all these non-traditional kind of roles and learning about technology and how to incorporate it. I mean, I remember when at U of C, when we had to implement, we were going from the conversion to Epic, there was no pediatric dosing range checking or any of that. Like, I had to really work with our team to build those tables. And so I think we're just kind of at the core of so many things that it's just kind of nice to see pharmacists in all these different roles doing really cool work, and it doesn't have to be what, you went to school for, or maybe you thought you were going to do. But, all that is important, right? Like all the things, those administrative tasks, the notes, it's important to know how to write those should things fail, right? Because that happens too. But yeah, that definitely taking that away, I won't miss it.
Me neither.
Yeah.
So does DoseMe have certain medications, or I know you already discussed Vanco and gentamicin, so maybe just focus on the health conditions that you feel like are the highest utilization health conditions for DoseMeRx.
Yeah, so just taking a step back to the medications, our platform gets used kind of in the US as well as outside, so internationally.
Cool.
And the cool thing about that is that I get to see how all these different pharmacists, pharmacologists practice and use the platform in different settings. So we have, a lot of models. It's not just the vancomycin and aminoglycosides. We have antiepileptics, there's oncology drugs, there's various other beta lactams as well. And so I would say outside of the US that they get utilized more than in the US. It's more focused on antimicrobials, because it's where I think it's because where the guidelines drive practice, as well as if it's required, therapeutic drug monitoring, while peds pharmacists are very used to doing it, and let's just get a level to figure out what's going on with this patient. People don't really like doing therapeutic monitoring, especially in the adult world. It's like if you can avoid it, they will. So, but the focus is on those medications that have the narrow therapeutic index, right? So you really want to make sure you get to that goal levels. Mostly, it's mostly used for antimicrobials. But we do, like I mentioned, have some oncology drugs like busulfan, for example, that's used quite a bit in peds population, in the leukemia population. So that's actually another model that we're seeing a growth in the use of it in the US as well, because PK was always done for busulfan, but it was always sort of like outsourced, so to speak. So it would go to a lab and somebody else would help you do the kinetics. But I think with a lot of things that happened during COVID and, the logistics challenges. So I think a lot of institutions are bringing in-house those level monitoring. So they need a software to be able to do the dosing, right? So oncology is a space that's growing, and it continues to grow because I think there's a lot of data and evidence coming out that you really need to monitor some of those medications to make sure that you're having the optimal exposure and the best outcomes. So those are, I would say those are kind of the big categories. But I think as people are becoming more comfortable with using a software, so, it's like they try with the peds, it's actually interesting. So the peds clinicians, because the guidelines didn't really go into too much detail, they covered the peds patients, but they didn't go into too much detail. I think they were kind of letting the adults figure it out. So we're now seeing, not now, I should say, like last year, I started seeing more and more pediatric institutions like implementing this and really officially kind of converting over to AUC, because there's comfort level, there's more evidence. They're trying to see how they can make sure that they're kind of, being compliant with the guidelines. And also expanding to other areas. So things like warfarin and, transplant drugs like Tacro. So there's expansion in those areas now that there's an increase in comfort level. So those are kind of the main areas I would say now, but as more experienced clinicians get more comfortable with it, I think they're trying to expand its use for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at your website now, and it's exciting to see what's the amount of drugs that you have in review and in development. There's a lot. And we see so many children with anticonvulsants, and so just exciting to see what you guys got in the pipeline. It's a lot.
Yeah, and I'm biased towards peds, so I always make sure that we're always including that cohort. So we actually just, recently, added voriconazole pediatrics, another neonatal model. So, just always kind of listening to the customer, right, which is the pharmacist, like what are their other challenges. So one of the areas, kind of one of the first things we did was implement a second pediatric model shortly after I joined. And that was because, it's the unfortunate truth that pediatric patients, we're seeing more and more obese pediatric patients.
Sure.
And so dosing is very challenging for those patients because there's just no data. So a lot of our pharmacists were like, well, the current model, we can't really use it for those patients because there's limitations to each model and we can't really recommend going outside of this. Although I will say pharmacists get curious and they will try. So we implemented a second model to cover that cohort and make sure that it's a wider cohort to include pediatric obese patients. So when that is a patient you're taking care of, you can easily dose those patients. Similarly, we've added a second neonate model for vancomycin just to give another option because not every patient fits every model. And so just giving those options are just really beneficial for the clinicians. And so I always kind of make sure that when we're looking at drugs, we're always thinking about, all the cohorts and making sure that pediatrics are included.
Way to keep advocating for pediatric patients and making sure we've got all that we need to support them well. Sharmeen, you mentioned that, of course, all of your models at DoseMeRx are based on published studies and pharmacokinetic parameters that have been validated. So maybe you could peel back the curtain a little bit and tell us, how does your team go about finding that data, creating your models, and then validating them for clinical practice? What does some of that work look like behind the scenes?
Yeah, so I have a really, really smart science team that does a lot of that review initially when we, either get a request from a customer or we know that something's changing where it would be really helpful to say have, voriconazole, for example, level, right? So they go through a pretty rigorous process to identify validate published and validated model. Once we implement it in our system, we go through external validation that we collaborate with, just because we want to make sure that we're not really implementing something and not having anybody validate that it's actually correctly implemented, right? So independently gets validated. And then the clinical validation really just happens once the clinicians start using it. Everybody has a different approach. We don't really dictate that because it has to suit their needs, right? So, some pharmacists will say, okay, I'm going to have these 5 core team that's going to just kind of test it out and see how it works for our patient to develop a protocol that can then be passed on to the wider team and they can do the training and all that. So we don't really dictate that process, how they want to do that. Some will just kind of right off the bat say, well, you've done all this work to implement it. We'll just go ahead and kind of make it available. And then as questions come up, they can certainly reach out to us and we can, discuss it further. There's always, nothing's really perfect at the time where you make it available. You were always iterating. We're always, taking that feedback and closely monitoring and adjusting what we need to, just because those are our users. So we have to listen to the clinicians and make sure that, they're able to use it to the most optimized manner, in their workflow. So we're very close to our users and get their feedback routinely.
Very cool. How frequent is the training? What training resources are available? How do you make sure that as your app and your technology is updated, that all of your providers using this are in the know?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We do have quite an extensive implementation process, and in the onboarding, my implementation manager, he works closely with the team champions and providing a lot of resources as far as training. So there's the technical training, right? Here's the platform, here's all the buttons, this is how you navigate, this is how you get from one place to another. And then there's resources available for more clinical protocols and things. And you'll see this if you're working on a product, that you have to kind of balance not going over that, not offering clinical advice and clinical training because you're representing a product and software. So I will say that's a challenge for me because I'm a clinician at heart. So oftentimes it's like, well, I would do this, but really, there's limitations of what you can kind of provide as advice. So we provide all the resources we can, and we're also kind of always updating those because you train someone and then you get the questions and you think about it and say, maybe I should have included this in the training because we're getting this question often. So we have, kind of live training and video resources within the platform. We have also developed some competencies that, teams can utilize for their own training purposes. Oftentimes, I would say 90% of the time, the sites will take those and incorporate in some sort of training of their own. We also have a protocol library that is shared. So our customers are really generous and they will, it's a collaborative effort, right? So clinicians are very willing to share information with each other. So oftentimes we either refer them to, a similar site or a similar challenge they may be having, or maybe it's a, really large system. So it's really overwhelming. So we'll connect them to another user who went through that process to help them through. We have protocols that some of our sites have shared with us that they said, it's fine, you can go ahead and share this with other users if they would like. So there's a lot of different avenues. And then we also have a support channel. So it's like a chat, but it's, available 24/7. It's a live human that we have that is answering those questions. So anytime that, even like throughout the process of implementation or training, or even after they're live, if they ever have questions, that they can quickly get in touch with us and ask the questions. Some questions are easy and we provide help articles and resources for that, but some questions require a little bit more, I guess, in-depth review. And for those, we usually comes to me and my science team, and we review it and get back to them as soon as possible. So lots of resources available, and we're constantly growing that kind of section to make FAQ articles. We're I guess, continuously reviewing the inquiries we're getting. And if we notice a trend, then we'll just go ahead and create a resource or an FAQ or a help article around that, so then it can be answered easily from the help center versus somebody, having to reach out to us.
I love how much, from an innovation standpoint, you are listening to your user. It's this idea of user design, right? User experience that is integral to any product, particularly when it's software related. But it seems like you guys are knocking it out of the park. So keep it up. I wanted to transition. I'm passionate about innovation, but I'm also passionate about education. And I know that DoseMe has an educational product as well that I've used with my students. So I know some of our listeners are educators or preceptors. So Sharmeen, could you tell us a little bit more about that educational platform that DoseMe has created?
Yes, I love that you have used it. It makes me very happy because it's my goal to kind of, make that available. Again, the goal is to get it, get everybody exposed to it. And we know as pharmacists now, you have to have IT skills if you're going to work in a pharmacy. It doesn't matter what setting you're in, but you have to have it figured out. You're going to be interacting, at the very least, the EHR, which can be, depending on the EHR, it can be a lot of tools and, a lot of things you're navigating, and for sure other software. So one of the questions or queries or inquiries I receive often from pharmacists is a lot of pharmacists that aren't just familiar with Bayesian dosing or modeling software, right? Because this, I don't know about you, but it used to be one of those things that are special, pharmacologists sort of focused on, right? Now, it wasn't kind of mainstream, so to speak, in the clinical workflow. So, but these software are becoming more and more integrated into the workflow. So, why not start at the education? Because that solves a lot of challenges that pharmacists may see once they're in practice. So if they're not exposed to it when they're learning about PK, then how are they going to really grasp the concept when they're actually practicing? And so, a lot of European customers of ours do utilize what we have as a kind of free educational resource called the Dosing Institute. So it has some references and things like that, but also it's the educational version of our software. So if you're say, Justin, you're teaching PK courses and maybe you're covering the antimicrobial PK, and you want to demonstrate how a software can help you do that AUC guided dosing, you can, you usually there's a method of contacting us. We set it up, set up the access for the universities. And this is for university settings only because it's an educational resource, so not for clinical care. And so you can then use it in your lectures to demonstrate it. You can give, your students a way to sign up for it. And once they sign up, you can assign them cases or they can practice doing cases. So it's really setting them up for like a real life example. So I think I have gotten more interest and growth in the US, I would say, more and more pharmacy, I guess, educators and especially in those areas where they're dealing with TDM and kind of teaching those concepts and know that their software that they're going to be using, they're trying to incorporate it in various ways in their curriculum. So yeah, there's definitely more and more use of that, and I'm happy to see that. I used to be really involved with residency training and students, so that's something that I want to continue to make sure that we provide the resources for educators to be able to utilize, because once if you've seen it seen it and used it in cases while you're in pharmacy school, right? Then it becomes easier it's one less thing to have to figure out when you're a student or a resident in that training. So yeah, that's definitely available and can be utilized by anybody who's teaching at a pharmacy school.
Well, let me just quickly say thank you. It's been a benefit to our students here at Cedarville University. And personally, we're actually teaching in a new curriculum that has what we call synthesis weeks in it. And my intention is to use DoseMeRx, the educational platform, the Dosing Institute, more often, because what we're trying to do is bridge classroom to real life. And this is a great way to do it. Yep. So again, just wanted to say a hearty thank you for keeping that educational focus on your software. It's great.
That's great, Justin. That's great to hear. You let me know if you need anything as you're developing those cases or anything like that. Anything I can do to support that. But it makes me really happy when I know that somebody's actually using it and benefiting from it. Because sometimes you kind of start focusing on just the product and what you're doing. Kind of building with it, but to see it being used in kind of different environments, it's very rewarding.
That's amazing. And just like you're saying, Justin, I feel like maybe it's a good practice to know how to do the very cumbersome kinetics a couple times in your life. But ideally, we know that there's all these products available that are going to make us more efficient. And then we probably are not going to do them in real life unless we have an extra hour or two. Oh God, that was so painful doing them. Early in my practice.
Or running after the nurse to make sure the level's done correctly, and writing. I don't know. I used to have these templates, paper where I fill in the time of the dose, when you have to do the level. So if you don't have to do that, trust me, you don't want to, because the nurses will also love you for not bothering them.
Amen. So obviously, as I said, we're building out technology for perfecting peds, and we have a bunch of vendors who are building on Salesforce Health Cloud. And one of the most important things to us, and I'm assuming to DoseMe too, is HIPAA compliance, because obviously if you're able to integrate an EHR, pull the patient data, what are you guys doing as far as HIPAA compliance and ensuring that your software is safe?
And data security has become so important, right? Especially recently with all the things I'm sure you all read in the news with all the cyber attacks and things. So it's really scrutinized. It's actually one of the processes that takes quite some time when we're getting a new customer, because the IT team has to really review all our processes, policies, and things like that. We are the only Bayesian platform that is HITRUST R2 certified, which is kind of the highest level.
Yes, it
And
is.
a lot of work to get done, but we have it. So that really facilitates the process and kind of ensuring trust that everything's secure and we're kind of following the highest compliance policies. So yeah, that covers pretty much all of HIPAA, PHI, how it's handled. Because that's, really important. Because if you can imagine how, the data that is kind of being integrated, it's very important for us to keep on top of that. So that's what we have in place for our platform. We're also going we have CE mark, which is more for Europe and getting up classified. Europe is up classifying it as a device. So we're going through that process as well. And that's it's very, very security focused and making sure we have all the processes in place with, ISO and CE mark. So yeah, because we have to, make sure that we're meeting all the regulatory requirements for so many different countries and parts of the world. It's at the top of our list to make sure that we're up to date with everything. So yeah, and HITRUST really facilitates with that.
Sure does. We're in the process now of getting the org HITRUST, and it's like a 2-year, $300K minimum journey. So it's no joke. So I have immense amount of respect for you guys that you went through that. You're on the other side, because even though we're small and mighty, a team of what's going to be 35 soon, we still have one full-time cybersecurity person, because you can't get around it. And then again, working with health plans, you guys work with health systems, like the HITRUST R2 is like kind of your golden ticket once you get there, but it is a lot of work. So kudos to you and the DoseMe team for getting there.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but in the end, I promise it'll be worth it. You may think about it on the way that, why am I doing this? But it'll be worth it, because I can't see a world where that's not required. So, especially with everything that's happened recently. So yeah, I think it's just inevitable that everybody has to get that.
Sharmeen, I'm curious, as we start to wind down this episode, what does the future of DoseMeRx look like from your perspective? And maybe we can add in the pediatric spin too. Do you have things you'd love to see happen that you think would advance the therapeutic drug monitoring that is provided through your product?
What does the future look like? I want so many things in the future. So, I would love it if, I would love to make sure that every clinician has a platform in hand at the bedside, right, for dosing, because we have known as pediatric clinicians that one size doesn't fit all, but it seems like some other cohort of our population are slow to get that, but FDA is pushing for it, so that's good. So, I think we're going to continue to expand with a lot of these medications as more, drug therapies are becoming very complex, right? So it's not just like you give a dose and it works and that's it. As I mentioned oncology earlier, there's a lot of work being done in that space with CAR-T therapy and, some of these other agents that have been used, and they are being used in conjunction with that you really have to make sure that you're doing the right thing when it comes to dosing, because those are expensive treatments. You only get one shot, right? So, so my goal is to just continue to expand in some of those spaces where it's becoming crucial to make sure that you get the dose right, and for obvious reasons, and also just making sure with, the variability that's seen with all the other kind of physiological reasons why somebody would need various doses. I would love that to have pharmacists, especially pediatric pharmacists, be utilizing this more in more drugs, because I think we're going to continue to learn and evolve in how we're utilizing Bayesian modeling in clinical practice. And, one of the areas of focus has been to incorporate pharmacogenomics information, because that's also what's going to, hopefully, in my view, should become standard of care. We'll get there. It's a slow process, but we'll get there. So we've actually started incorporating models that include pharmacogenomics in there, because it just gives again, the full picture, right? So for example, voriconazole, you're starting it, you have the PK model, you have the PGx information. If you incorporate all that, you'll just be that much more precise. And that means you get to target sooner. That means you get the dose appropriate sooner. You're making sure the patient ultimately the patient outcome will be better. So, my goal is just to see what, how else we can improve on our models and what else we can incorporate that will be, give the most, make sure you're heading in the right direction and give the most accurate and precise prediction of dosing that we just didn't have available before. And we have the tools now, so we just need to continue to expand on those.
This has been fabulous. Thank you. I love the entrepreneurial spirit in you because that's what gets me excited enough every morning. And it's been a true pleasure. We so appreciate your time. If we wanted to find out more, I've been perusing the beautiful DoseMe website. As a fellow entrepreneur, I'm looking at who's on your board, your C-suite team, how much you guys raise, like all those things that just the things that I think of as you're talking. Extremely impressed by your organization. If they wanted to find out more information outside of the website, what are some additional ways that they could get in contact with you and your organization?
Yeah, we're very active on LinkedIn, so feel free to use that channel. We didn't even get into the advisory board as you mentioned it, but lots of research happening there. I can certainly share some links. We actually just recently did a poster as well at ECMID, and it was focused on pediatric big data. It was like 5,000 patients in that cohort. So yeah, I think that would be really great if more pediatric clinicians saw that. But yeah, LinkedIn, our website, we have, like I said, a chat functionality. So anybody who contacts us through that will get somebody live. It's a human, not a robot. So those are all the ways, all the ways that we can, get back to you or answer any questions.
No, that's so cool. You never get the personalized touch anymore. You just always assume you're talking to a robot. So again, applaud you and your team. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Justin, any parting words?
No, I just want to echo thanks to Sharmeen, and thanks, Shawnette, for joining us. It's always great to have students behind the scenes. So it's just know a lot of our podcasts, we actually have students as a part of this. So it's great to have you. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I'm laughing because poor Shawnette gets thrown into a board advisory meeting and then followed by a patient and then a vendor and then we're in a health plan. Like it's Russian roulette every day, right, Shawnette? You never know what you're showing up for. She's laughing hysterically. All part of the fun.
Yeah,
Yes,
you'll be
definitely.
thankful for that experience one day. Trust me.
Well, thank you guys. It's been a true pleasure. I hope everyone has a fabulous day.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.